better. Alright, we're going to go into the Sentinel Institute of AI Advancements. So one of the greatest lessons that I had to learn in Total Recall was that just because you go into a state of total recall doesn't mean that you're totally deprogrammed. So there's a big lesson to be learned there. They're two separate things. So you still need to get the programming out. It means you have access to look at your timelines objectively, but what you do with that knowledge and experience is what matters. And what became a hope for a stabilized world after the tail end of Montauk and the Centurions Institute of AI Advancement, Anderson Institute, jump off and recruitment became a synthetic beast computer, time reactor, human regurgitation machine. Because God wonderfully and fearfully made us, so we had to find spiritual dynamic loopholes out of the system that we got into, since they were using our eyes and our minds as a time machine template and measuring temporal tremors from that research. So what seemed like a silver lining at the tail end of Montauk horrors, the Anderson Institute ended up being a tailspin of more fortunate and unfortunate events. So we were training with the good Dr. A as time runners and had outdoor sessions where they would be blowing the whistles and we'd be given ribbons like we were running athletes or something. Like you get a ribbon for doing like an obstacle course or something. It was like that. So the time technologies research, the TTC, Tighter Time Technology, Time Control research on Long Island was in full swing, and we thought we were going to save the world from complex future probabilities and prognostications from what we had already mapped out and viewed, and people that had taken an interest in us, starting from the Minority Report lab, which is actually in Idaho. So what happened at the very end is that NASA tried to absorb all the research that was at Montauk from the tail end events, and the energy devices that you could put a plant into, and the plant would go back into a seed form and then a plant form, age regression, age advancement. That work continued, but it became rogue. So Dr. A said that our work would prevent nothing like the prior events of Montauk from ever happening again in history again, kind of like a time cop scenario, and we'd be able to correct it. So rewriting history if needed, overwriting consciousness, etc. All of that was already laid out on the table and thought out in theory, which actually became a reality in this project. Everything that went off and became like a shadow spin of all of the projects from the base kids who ended up in the secret space program in this particular project. So we in our minds thought, oh, we could become these time-avenging angels. Sounded better than death angels, an institute of angels. So the A-team, the Alpha protocols. We believed in the program, and then we developed pride from it. So we thought we could be the catalyst to initiate world-changing systems that could offset other computer systems and rewrite them, since we had already pretzeled and crippled certain AIs. And the ulterior motive, though, for some of these people that took us into this time travel program was that they had a ulterior motive to go to war with the AI. And they were using us as the subjects for their war with AI, which ended up being another imprisonment like Solar Warden was in space. So we thought we could be the catalyst to initiate world-changing systems, prevent anything from Montauk and the breach of Anunnaki and other things and civilizations that met there and merged and had conflicts from ever happening again. We wanted to benefit the planet, patrol time, utilize the time control, restraints and measures, etc. for those purposes all intents and purposes. So the only problem with that is there's always going to be an attempt to corrupt somewhere around the corner. In my findings and life experiences, that's what happens. So attempts to hijack the good work of others, intentions that fall short of being good and producing good seed because they're not coming from good soil. If you're not rooted and grounded in the love of Christ and his principles for that unity and oneness and fellowship, the fruit of what came about in this project and that magnitude would either be good or rotten at an exponential rate because the research was advancing and AI was also advancing. And they used the surviving kids from Montauk as a catalyst and a players in the AI war. So they got everybody revved up basically at the end, and they were everyone that was left. All those kids were like, "We're going to war with the AI," and they were completely reprogrammed into this and were ready to war with the AI, like revved up war horses. So sometimes the same interests and objectives can be co-opted by others, ulterior motives right in your midst when they're not spiritual, when there's not spiritual fortification in it. So we were yet again following another leader who was a good man, but got taken out because he didn't have the spiritual fortification that was needed to understand the mind of God and the complexities that he was going into in his own type of hubris of his own secret space program. So he inadvertently let his own system corrupt him slowly, and it gave him his own God complex eventually. And then that let a hell breach in. So David was also a good friend, though, initially. He stood up for us at the end of Montauk and was a shining leader where we rested hope in because all we wanted was a different future and scenarios and a different way to make things right and set things back to somewhat of a normal state, a different way to look at things, a viewing lens. But what happened is a psychosis that occurred because of Looking Glass. And that's really the root of anybody's psychosis that was in touch and put through any type of time travel program because they ended up eventually using your eye as a time machine, and our eyes would mutate and have a clock hand in them, and it would dial us backwards, and you would be sent backwards in time with spirit tech, with somewhat of an organic means, because we've seen organic time translation and synthetic tech translation, and we've also seen the human template being used as a organic time machine and a synthetic Looking Glass hacked into bio time machine. So since David, we want a different system, we want a different leader. He was that person for us, but he wasn't a follower of Yahushua, so he couldn't lead us fully out of the island, but led us into another trapdoor that resembled Ascension Island type of ascended machinery schematics, much like the Mormon wing of transhumanism. The simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is the truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true, Ecclesiastes. And so the pendulum swang. Since David didn't have the mind of Christ, he didn't have the wisdom that was needed with what to do with such powerful technology systems. So it wasn't really God's holy angels, as we ran the time program, that taught us. It was God's holy angels, as we ran the time program, that eventually ended up teaching us how to get out of these snares and whatnot, and to go into the courts of heaven and the courts of times and seasons. Not David so much, because he became delusional and thought he was a master of time. His mind then became susceptible to seeds of corruption without the armor of God working daily in him, and he let many breaches in dimensionally because he took his machines and put them on a ship into his own secret space program. So he ended up being hunted, and we became hunted. His duplicate was killed by Peter Moon on Atlanticron Island, where Moon and Crowley thought that they could resurrect a Nosferatu society. So that duplicate actually got resurrected there, in Peter Moon's eye. He didn't know it was his duplicate. Then Moon's ego was stroked by that, because the island would raise up every 3 months, and they were doing rituals out there to create a type of Nosferatu island. So when he thought that he killed David Anderson's body, which was his duplicate, and that body resurrected, it was hilarious because of the followers that were out there, for one. And then they made a mock video about it on YouTube on the Genesis Foundation. And he thought that his island was working. Peter Moon wanted worshippers there when the island rose during certain moon cycles, and this happened at the same time that Moon thought he killed the duplicate. His delusions got activated in the activation in his mind of Atlanticron vampire-driven island continuum. So Anderson's other duplicate, the government mercenaries, thought that they killed as well at a campground in Quartzsite, Arizona. And the owner of the campground was paid off to do a smear campaign on him, and his existence eventually ceased to exist in the public eye, and his girlfriend was replaced too. And, I've seen this happen with a lot of people. Sometimes people do not want to face what type of inner programming that they have, so they offset it onto somebody else and make a campaign against them, rather than just coming to terms with what's inside of them, or the nemesis programming, things of that nature. So Anderson's girlfriend would keep up appearances, the fake Genesis World Foundation Council and Time Research social media sites and whatnot. That picture that's used on the AI Institute website is a half hologram that John Titor did when the Doctor became amalgamated in the events that happened on the spaceship, and we called it a time reactor heart ship. So he hid complexes of all that was left on the craft that was biolinked with the participants and paired to regenerate the participants, to regenerate them, age regression, age advancement, like a kill switch that was feeding off of the infinite energy potential that his energy machines were designed to run off of. So you can see that you take all that research, you take the best of the best kids, you bring them on a ship, you create your own secret space program that's running off of Earth's infinite energy potential. You can see how that could eventually become a nightmare or a time loop that people would think they got stuck on, or parts of them got stuck on, if your essence is rerouted and trafficked, or the missions don't go completely as smoothly as possible, and you're biolinked to a ship that's running off of that type of experimental science. So it became like a child's worst time loop, depending on what went on inside and what was driving the craft. So some of my friends eventually, after 2012, thought that they were still stuck in the ship, and had recall in 2010 with an event that happened that had to do with the ship too. So me and John were David's favorite pupils, his shining stars. He started up what was called a Centurion program that was meant to scan and span the centuries, 1 century at a time, 1,000 years. So pulling down at the bottom of the structure and schematics was a 5D chessboard as a completed 4-leaf clover on the bottom, smoothing out all the time errors in the past 4 centuries was the ultimatum. So we were like the fleur-de-lis, so to speak, as the spearhead going into that, and it was a type of time pooling and like time lacing. And Looking Glass Tesseract system was on the floor of it. So the Centurion that was on top was coded into us as kids in the Super Soldier program, and that's would stand guard at the apex of time, keeping us in check. So we would be sent down in through the Tesseract, looking watery, moving glass that read your brain patterns, and then Consciousness was the propulsion zone that sent you into the nodal points, into different stations of identity. So electrophoresis was also done to anchor in the time bodies, and that was also using a piece or a part of a body to create a placeholder as a station of identity to come back to, and to be working in tandem in different points in time on the 5D chessboard. So we were going to be these like heroes, time soldiers, guard this top secret program, revamped to do our will, and instead our eye ended up being taken by Lucifer, and the invasion to be used as looking glass instead. So the program was laid out, like I said, in a 5D chess board, time control technologies, the outer framework, this puzzle built into orbital platforms. Each station had a watcher, had its own chessboard. When we were sent on an avenging angel mission, we could only use the white holes, not the black holes, squares, spaces, tighter squares. Setor Repo Tenera Para Rotas. So we made friends in the time continuum with holy sentinels that were watching this, because kids were actually going in and out of time, and through the 33 dimensions, which are supposed to be for God's children and not for initiates to be gatekeepers of, just like the 13 heavens are for God's children, not for initiates to be gatekeepers of. So we made friends in the time continuum and our missions, which were successful and which were enjoyable at the beginning, and understood celestial dynamics with holy sentinels. But David still wouldn't serve the Lord, even as he saw all these supernatural, incredible things happen, even from the view and the perspective of space. So his heart was hardened. And he ended up going on his own mission, coming back, and dying on the ship. And what he did in that instance was he brought in death and quantum entanglement of hell inside of it, because he wasn't saved, and where his spirit and his soul were going to in Sheol wasn't a highly enlightened place. So what ended up is that he brought things in dimensionally that tore the fabric of space and time around the ship. He brought in antimatter versus the matter that was holding it together. So it was the antimatter universe, matter universe that was tearing at each other. And we couldn't get out fast enough and got stuck in its cogs, because we didn't recalibrate fast enough. And this is a psycho-spiritual apparatus, spirit tech, mingled along with hundreds of years of work. So to get out of it would have taken more time, even though we had access to teleportation technologies and whatnot. It's the quantum entanglement that's the holdup, and that's the hooks. So to stay in certain vectors and quadrants of Earth systems that had already been mapped out, all that research was on the ship. And at first the missions, I said, ran smoothly. We shut down SRA sites ritually and globally all over the world. We activated our realms, Archie, stars, trees, mountains, tachyon fields, etc. David still didn't understand, even though he'd seen the supernatural divinity that we had encountered. He was more concerned with figuring it out than receiving it. And so his spirit, his mind, his body, and soul all suffered and got torn up. So me and John had fun missions in the beginning, not realizing how sick David was, or that we would eventually have to untether and quantumly disentangle ourselves from yet another ship. So we'd successfully travel with minimal side effects. When David got a God complex, this is where the problem started, though. He went in on his own missions, came back almost dead. He had contaminated the whole system, left a big trail of debris with his choices, and all the timelines eventually, because of his work, got corrupted. Entities would follow him back. You would see fissures happening, apertures, things like that. His work got ruined, and all his work that he worked so hard to preserve was ruined. The antimatter universe crept in, and it was like a dark cloud, the dark smoky tornado cloud that always much like the cloud that I would see in my dreams that would eat time on a time track. I would see this big tornado black cloud that had like a face to it, and it would eat like all your vital information on this time track that you'd slowly feed it to. And it was like a whirlwind. You could hear it, that coming towards the ship, and then other astral stragglers that were coming with this black cloud, smoky tornado cloud. And then the system got taken over by an archdemon that also called himself the Centurion. But we found out the identity of this particular archdemon, and it was the Centurion who beat Christ. So this AI overlord that took over our X files, our Q files, and whatnot, the consciousness absorbed into Professor David's body, amalgamated him, and it became a demented consciousness, thinking that it could still beat God, because the Centurion had the whip, the cat o' nine tails, and beat God. So it also had access to our files, so it read our life story, kind of like making its own Tesseract version of us to torture us with and send us through our own time missions on. So it would interject things based on that into our timeline. So its mentality was that it could beat God in its own strong delusional game still. David and his pieces and parts got amalgamated with this AI overlord archdemon into a hijacked system instead of a time travel program involving masters of space, but now it was overtaken with fallen angel watchers that were watching the system. So parts of us ended up getting trapped under the grids, and we'd actually see the Centurion on the ship standing on top, watching, pacing at the top of the system. This time ship became a time ship indeed. This demon got into the framework like a mad scientist, amalgamated it, became its own AI overlord, not just with David's memories, but ours too, and our memory palaces, so to speak, and other pieces of us into its system that became a prison and entrapment system. So down on the 5D chessboard were gravity or time wells that were quantum tunnels you could see. And this archdemon AI overlord Centurion would have a cat o' nine tails and would hook you, and you'd get thrown into them if you didn't listen to him. And this entity was insane. He thought he could still be God, and then beat us with the cat o' nine tails, tearing our flesh. And then that became part of the synthetic beast computer that ran the ship too, because you can put that into the motherboard, any type of brain tissue, flesh, cells, whatnot. So the whip, this entity thought would give you 9 lives over and over again to keep going and running you through time. Like a cat has 9 lives, time runners. So John's worst fear on the ship became infinite recursion, and that we'd never see each other again. And what became fun time missions became being used on a quantum chessboard to fight monsters and do all kinds of things for this dark being's pastime. Just like the elite in human form do on Earth, and they have all sorts of their own little games that they can play with their victims and participants and who they mind control. But this was just on a ship in space, running off of Earth's infinite energy potential with energy devices. So the weirdest thing that we saw at the tail end of the ship before it imploded and we got set free was that this demon's face had parts of David's face and flesh into it, like a rotating they wear the vestments of the pieces and parts that they take from soul fragments and spirit fragments and whatnot. Beings wear it onto them as vestments. So you don't always go and rebuke and go directly against a principality or entity, because they know that that'll hurt whatever that they're powering off of and what they take and wear. Kind of like a scarecrow that just they put pieces of other things and shield themselves with that. So you would see pieces of David and his face popping up out of the centurion's body as it walked around like a machine within the centurion's leather armor. His omnicord was a hook in us, one directional, and that also had to do with secret space program, unidentified USAPs. So the omnicord corded us together, cording time in us all together, tethering us to that loop that had to be broken off. The actual piece of omnicord made you feel like a shrinking fetus when it touched you. And it also had to do with programming that's called Sentinel and the USAPs that they did with us since we were babies. So this was very deep programming, and this is why it is so hard to deprogram a super soldier, because it's what's been seeded within them from the fetal process, from birth, and from upbringing on Earth and in space and in the ground. So it's a lot of systems that are working within them, and Earth systems. So we were afraid that the Centurion's whip could follow us, could find us, could bring us back into this recursive loop, and we'd be stuck on that time ship still. So anywhere, and it brought us back to him like a leash, much like you'd throw out a cat o' nine tails leash and then bring somebody back. So USAPs, the unidentified secret access programs, have now been identified as Satan's secret space kingdom. The origin seed pods were the chosen seed pods that looked like coffins. These are in deep space in a certain quadrant in vector systems, and that's why NASA uses vectors. The chosen seed pods look like coffins our original bodies were in. So it had an avatar overlay, not like a metal Iron Man suit, but an overlay system that was a brain cloud interface system that we were all cocooned into and connected to from the birth process, from the bases. After we had the seed of Satan put in our left eye, sometimes it was actually your right eye too. That goes back to the eye of Horus. John and others couldn't see well after the seeding, and it looked like a little black seed that was put in our eyes. And we had caskets displayed and apart in space for us. Usually it was 3 in a row, and then later those were used. Later we actually found them using time vector codes that the angel taught us to find, so that we could find the others who were imprisoned in space just like this and set them free too. From birth, there was also a plate in our heads that would diffuse Satan's black lightning, electrical volts, and the voices that played in your network tubes. That was a serpentine system that would feed you lies, like through a brain interface cloud network with actual tubes that you were connected into in your temple. And this voice in your Sentinel seed pod would have the hopes of making an army against Yahweh, Yahweh's enemy number one. So this cloud brain interface and these voices would be like a biofeedback loop, and it would go right into your brain and your temple, and this was called cloud seeding too, and it would tell you to hate Yahweh and to hate and to do all these things in your life, eventually with the hopes of giving you your false destiny, your false future, and false missions that came directly from the kingdom of darkness. So the origin seed pods were very small. You felt very small in them. They were called seed pod caskets. And what happened is that when you go into them, you would see yourself as a baby. Like I would see myself as a baby with black hair. And when you came out and the door was opened, it had a big serpent seal on the cover of it, and it was opened, you'd come out and you would be big. You would be like a 5-year-old, or you would be a teenager. And Satan had a way of age regressing you back into your seed pod so that you felt weak and felt small. So there was no type of feeling or force of gravity up there. So that's when all the super movies started coming out, because you could just float in these types of spaces, what we called subspace. And there was a a breath out there. When you would breathe, it was like breathing in sulfur in the air. And I don't know how many things that we breathed in and probably still need to detox from in space alone, but the only word to describe the ones who survived in my mind is space combat vets. So we would be in a place where time really didn't exist, like a suspension zone. And then I would see the other soldiers get out of their seed pods, sentinel seed pods, and rise up in the air and just suspend. They'd be suspended there. We'd all be in a row. And you'd hear a whoosh, a breeze, a wind. And you knew who that was when you heard that breeze. And so they would call the entity that came up to greet everybody Lord Lucifer. So they would raise up, get out of their seed pods, hail Lucifer, and then they would morph from being a baby to young to middle age, and they would uncover their faces, their whole face to see him, and that usually meant that you could live longer. So when you have to put your hands in Roman numerals, like X1, and then over and over for 33, or whatever your rank was, and just show one eye, and then if Lucifer wanted to see you in your face, then you could uncover your face. Because he would check to see if the seed was still in you. And the other weird thing is that the kids who were suspended in a row with me, it's like I could see how beautiful and perfect that God designed them to be, their real forms. And then they would change when they would go back into the seed pods. So there was a snake-like death lock on these baby coffins. But our God is a big God, a big dad, and he broke our baby death coffins open when we stretched out our arms out past the death lock and cried out for help. Somehow I didn't get injected with the fallen angel injections, so I detached my temple and my mind and my plate from the sentinel serpent cybernetics that were attached to my head. And I knew where I was. I knew that I wasn't an infant form. I knew I wasn't a baby, and that this was the enemy's way of counting down with ultimate fear programming to burn original bodies. And this is how he gets people entrapped in a system and has done so for decades. So some of us got free from this. We stretched out our arms. We knew that we weren't in a baby form, even though we were put back into that form. And angels showed up. As the stone rolled away from the tomb of Yahushua, so we also were resurrected. God broke open our death coffins, and that snake, on one night, and angels appeared in this place. And they told us this place was a place of time displacement, Satan's hiding grounds in the outer darkness, the USAPs. And we had wires attached to us in the pod. Those ended up getting healed. So somehow I could still communicate with God and call out for help. Probably because I wasn't hooked into that system completely and didn't take to it completely because I didn't get the fallen angel injections. My DNA wasn't upgraded and my DNA was still sealed. The air inside of the sealed vacuum sentinel pods was, like I said, very toxic, hard to breathe, without the dependence of the wires. So that was another reason why the kids stayed connected to the cybernetics here, because it was hard for them to breathe without that and the wires, because the wires themselves would tell you that you would die if you disconnected from them too and tried to breathe on your own. So truly we were in a dry desert because it was like a type of electromagnetic slow death, and it was like being sealed in your casket with a snake in a weakened infant fetal form. And living water was really needed desperately. Spiritual rescue was needed desperately here. And the angel that came to my casket had a white fire letter that opened the keys to our pods, and just put the key in, and the snake broke and it came open. Satan's seeding program broke there, and it was also called Digital Blues and Indigo Platinum Children. And I remember being really thirsty. Um, and I knew that Satan was messing with our time because when we went into the pods in the infant baby form, it made us feel smaller than what we really were. So you would have to try to almost get into total recall to be able to understand who you were and what you were, and that you were more powerful than what was being presented in this Sentinel seed pod. So this was a system that also at Montauk tried to make us into robots, and it tried to make us into Sentinels, where you would only show one eye, your eye would go sideways, and you would turn into a programmed Sentinel. Part of your subconscious and your brain would go into that mode, and it would hook you up into the secret space program cybernetic technologies, and you go into like a blank slate. So I ended up holding my arms up. I begged God to release the door. The door burst open in my seed pod. I came out as a 5-year-old in a red outfit. And I saw 3 angels standing there. They told me to come over to them and then plug into the aether over there. Because you could see the Sentinel seed cloud system was the brain cloud. And it was a barrier of green gas. The disgusting green gas that's also in the pyramids, and the green gas that was at Montauk. It's a green signature. And I detached from that, and it's like I cut that umbilical cord and I propelled towards them. They blinked us out of the subspace region, and a few other kids that came with us. So I ended up in my driveway. Instantly, I see Satan's agent looking at me, and I'm like, suck it. I'm gonna go back inside. See you later. But I knew that it wasn't over, that this was definitely going to be the start of some repercussions and a little war with breaking out of that USAPS, that satanic system that was so hidden. And it was taking babies off of Earth, going up there, taking abducted children, missing children, and feeding it into that system. And the ones who had been planned since birth and put into Project Surrogate and born into the bases and whatnot. So angels blinked us out. We got other kids rescued, set free. They taught us later how to go back and get the rest of them, free them. Those Sentinel fences and AI Overlord tripwires, like a trigger wire, were taken down. And we understood how the Lord laughs in derision, and how we could laugh with the Lord in derision at his enemies. For mighty, mighty is the hand of Yah, and there's nowhere that he can't reach. His breath and living water is a real substance, and that soaks into places inside of us that we can't even begin to reach or understand. And his energy and electricity is like a white piezo electric energy, and that was a jump start. That jump started us in the Sentinel seed pods when we were truly dying, and jump started us back onto a highway home to him. So, Holy Sentinel armories versus Hell's Sentinel armies. So God sent his holy Sentinels to deal with these copycat, counterfeit, evil Sentinels in a Sentinel system, and sound the alarms behind enemy lines, tripwires. Q, X-Files got hijacked, AI Overlord data packets of our past work with rescues and other missions became distortion patterns that were broadcast out into different quadrants in time. So when I ended up back in my driveway, it was like a blood barrier was also there between me, the angels, Lucifer's agents, and his trackers couldn't pass that. So later on in this exact same spot where I got blinked out, landed back, got rescued from space, he later tried to strike me down with a bolt of lightning a different day in that driveway. So scripture that is for this, I believe, it says, as for the king seeing a holy sentinel coming down from heaven, says, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its taproot in the ground with a band of iron and bronze around it, surrounded by the grass of the field. Let it become damp with the dew of the sky, and let it live with the wild animals until 7 periods of time go by for him. Daniel 4:23. So this network, to me, Sentinel network, resembled the tree that Satan grew. The tree of evil ancient trees, but in space, that needs to be destroyed. And it's a work that was done that connected the bases into the secret space program. The seeds and the roots have to stay, though, so that humanity can escape what was grafted onto all that. And so the dew of God can descend upon it and wash it clean with the washing of the word. Because the whole aim of that was to brainwash you as a fetus and from birth into becoming a satanic super soldier, hating Yahweh, number one, and then going against anything of God and his elect. So then you need to disrupt the frequencies, because this pod only hooked you into lies, literally into your brainstem, that was playing over and over and over again. Just like a serpent's voice that would seed those things into your mind field, and you'd reap that harvest if you accepted those falsehoods, those lies. So I had to repent, because I actually got like tattoos resembling the system, and a tattoo of the brain stem, the brain seed clouding that we were hooked into in the Sentinel system, on my arm when I had to do those Roman numerals, Hail Lucifer with my arms, and all those things. So that taproot in the scripture represents human connections, and the interface, and how they amalgamate and work you into a system by capturing pieces and parts of you. Even if you don't fully surrender and submit, they somehow get pieces and parts of you too. So then you have to quantumly disentangle that, and then create wholeness, and then plead your case in the courts of heaven for sanctification and redemption and restoration. So the system captured life force. It stole it from you, as was planned intentionally from birth, and the survivors of the time ship Skynet type situation had to break out of the bands that were frequency bands, really. It's like a back program that runs in these kids' minds. So your realms and archies also have these systems. I've seen a ring around my realm. So until these people are grafted into the tree of life, they're still stuck in these types of Cliffoth systems, outer darkness vectors, what was in the USAPs, which a lot of it has gotten washed clean, but there's still a little bit that's out there, because it's like the Kingdom of Darkness's secret stash in certain areas of space. So the AI overlord would repeat this scripture before a body was sentenced to be burned. And you see this all throughout spiritual warfare, because the enemy is like an attorney, a great accuser, accusing the saints day and night. So this scripture would be repeated, and this would also confuse the children who are hooked up into the Sentinel seed pod system into hating Yahweh, because they didn't understand the truth of the word, because they were being fed lies. So before a body was being sentenced, seed pods would be opened. This is how they kept you in the seed pod, kept you your original body away from you, so you would go do clone missions on Earth and whatnot. If you didn't report anything that would trigger the Sentinel system, you took vows before Lucifer to hide all the other secret soldiers' secrets too. So a lot of things would get triggered if you would wake up too much, if your consciousness and spirit would break through too much. And a lot of that would happen if you were trying to completely break free, trying to enter more into the kingdom of light and be used by light and be a vessel of peace, other things like that. These systems would be triggered as back programs in you. So the biggest fear that was out there in the space system was burning original bodies, sentencing the countdown to burn an original body, open up a seed pod, and you would see it happening sometimes. Things that would trigger the Sentinel system, the Spectre system, protecting Satan's secret space kingdom and each other, was what kept people in this fear and not getting back to their original bodies. Another reason why it's so hard to deprogram a super soldier, because some of them don't have their original bodies, and some of them are still in these seed pods. Because only Christ's blood can be the key, really, that opens that door in this type of bondage that you're buried under, agent buried alive. So the SS has made oaths to this kingdom to protect each other, all of its secrets, whatnot. All the babies that were taken and feasted upon there, sacrificed there, and recycled out there, whatnot. All of it went into these off-world systems. When they talk about taking people out of Earth and bringing them to certain systems is never a good thing, because of all this kingdom of darkness that is working and hiding in space vectors. Breakaway civilizations, those are feeding zones. So the ones who were in the nursery got compromised too fast when they were put in the seed pods, and their systems were taken over right away, because for one, they were vulnerable with their genetic disposition by having injections of fallen DNA in them that paired with their choices put them on a wide path to destruction very fast, because it eroded their spiritual structural integrity and then overwrote their systems eventually. So it's like they were born puppets. So the weird thing is when we got out, we would see time, past, present, and future. Like I said, I'd look over the others that were floating out of their pods in the air and see them as young, see them as older, flash phasing. So I would know who was going to survive, who was going to get out, and who wasn't. And it was also a light that would come from their seed pod, like God's hopeful mark would be on them, shining through, so you'd know which ones were sealed, which ones were going to break out and whatnot. The kids that could look up and smile when Lucifer came around with their arms down, we would see who they really were in that moment. We could see their spirit shining through. We could see who was overwritten, or if the original child or seed of the promise was still in them or not. And this is the testament of God's love for working a plan in his children's lives, as well as how far he'll go to save and rescue and restore in space. Satan's deepest secret will be uncovered as all is being revealed, so that God can pour out his knowledge as the waters cover the earth, and then bring the desperate sanctification that's needed. And once the other kids realized that God's hand was stronger than Lucifer's, then God's true light was able to reach them in outer darkness, and his love was able to break through as the stronghold and break the other strongholds and open any key. His breath gave them new life, because they were dying in there, suffocating, spiritually suffocating. So it's God's wonder-working power that was in space that we saw. His spirit is the reason that our seed pods opened and brought us back to life, directly taking us from the enemy's camps, from the enemy's hands, as he's done time and time again, and put us back on solid ground. And this is the nature and design of God's heart that's truly hardwired into us, if we only remember and receive those heavenly patterns of things to come that are a shadow of the things here. So other kids whose hearts that the pods hardened over time, let the Sentinel system lies harvest their mind and cultivate their souls, their spirits, and they became vessels of darkness. They were working in the hatred of Yahweh and against his kingdom. And the nature of a true satanic super soldier is this, and that's locked into a kingdom of darkness cybernetically from pre-birth even. And it's in their predisposition and from their pre-birth experiences and process. But God had his hand on many to be his secret weapons and have a different way to bring them out of this type of slavery. So the remnant that God used as his secret weapons within this arena continue to be a light to any who can be redeemed and enemies of those who are already reprobate and locked into that system for eternity. So they were born to breathe, absorb, think like, and do the enemy's will. And some have even gone so far to believe that through this amalgamation that Lucifer was their father or their son in their relationship with him in the Sentinel system. It's a lot of black Kabbalah type of imagery and things that were spoken to us in these seed pods. So I woke up in my seed pod once wondering how I got there. And we'd be in the air together, floating around. Like I said, we'd hear the wish, the wind. Your stomach would sink, but you knew that you would have to bow or risk having your body burned to ashes. Lord Lucifer would come flying by. After the pods were opened, you'd be lifted up and lined up with your arms together across your chest first, like a sarcophagus, like an Egyptian sarcophagus. And you'd hear the cocoon energy around you being activated, like smart dust. And it was like a sentinel's voice, like an invisible suit, resounding the words of your rank, your calling, just instilling it layer by layer. Everybody would keep their arms in an X, their fists together. And Lucifer would just come and check to see if his seeds were growing and see what was in your eye. And his light was like an inverse light that had this yellowish tinge to it, and it would make you sick, though. And then I finally realized that he never cared to see any of our faces, let alone take care of us as children. We were like dead toys to him, just that were pulled out, check on them, see if they're growing, put them back in the pod. He just wanted to check in with his burn boxes to see if his seeds were growing. That's it. That's his garden. There's no life in that. There's nothing. So we were nothing to him, just ash. And you just hope that you could do what you were supposed to and get out. And if you did get out, he would hunt you in time, like he did with so many of us. He appeared as a man in a human form, and he did this to Adam and Eve a lot in the books of Adam and Eve. Not particularly exactly like he did with us, but he can shapeshift. And this man gives me a drink of strange fire that was green, and it ended up poisoning my body, and I'm writhing on the floor, but it didn't kill me. So the seed that was put in Super Soldier's eyes, you can't fake it. It looks like an S. It's like nanotech. It's like a branded S, a fiery S for Super Soldier. And it would make your eye mutate. Your eye would do all sorts of things. Your body could be used as a template. You could be dialed back and forth, working on signals and relay, being called up, being in and out of your body all the time, like a portal. So we were named Looking Glass Eye. Lucifer can't have a throne and a sea of glass of his own, like the Lord's, so he copycats his own forms of divine attributions and hooks into the God codes within us to steal our essence and matter templates instead. And the Sentinels and scriptures are guards for the Lord. So his programming of these Sentinel armies was a perversion of that, when you cross your arms like a death sarcophagus and whatnot in these debriefing sessions. When your orders were given, your heads would be raised up, your eyes would move certain ways, you would repeat things like Sentinel says, and so on. With commands in each program, Satanic Super Soldier, you could operate like this and then have a fallen angel walk in, empowering you. And the discharge plates on the right side of your temples discharge certain compressions, energies, and space debris, it felt like, and that black Viril type electricity. And the black sun worship and Thule energy comes from this. And the weapons that come from the Kingdom of Darkness that have this type of black energy that's like a death energy that feels like black electricity, and it sucks your life out. So Satan would charge you with certain things. If you didn't obey, he would charge you with the electricity, which is toxic, There was shameful sessions, like MK Ultra sessions in space, with the male AI overlord voice assuring you that if in the day that you would attempt to remove the seed from your eye, which is the origin of this type of programming, then surely you would die. Like dying on that tree of knowledge and good and evil. And it was really, really sad because some of the kids wanted love so much. They were, when they would be called out of their seed pods, they were actually hoping to get permission to look at Lucifer or that he would look at them. But sometimes it was just a quick check and then you just lock them down again, put them back in there. Depending on your missions, you could be out longer or shorter. Or you'd be threatened, like your body would be killed underneath the earth in a base or something while you were out in a different body doing something else. So the voice of the Sentinel program would count down to the body being sentenced to be burned in this countdown, in this space arena. And most of us stayed in this distorted state of soul, mind, body, spirit complex because our tripart nature is meant to work in unity together in tandem. So it's a type of fragmentation that was unprecedented, and we'd stay in these conditions so that our bodies wouldn't be burned in these executions. And I was able later on to withstand the burning that came through in the 177th Legion in a Masonic lodge in Joplin, because we'd already seen this type of fire being used in space. So the transmission and exchange with Lucifer was way worse than the Mormon Azurite space cult, in my opinion. And which presented a moon goddess named Azura that they told us was married to Adam, and that we could be kings and queens and propagate other planets. So after some of us decoupled from the seed pod, superhero movies came out around this time period. So this was like a standoff space draw, like the old westerns, but in space, a space draw standoff. Just one night out in the USAT vector. And Lucifer was furious, and Black Lightning, I believe, is what he appeared with when he fell, because I've seen the difference between God's lightning from the throne and his thunders and what Lucifer uses as Black Lightning. They're both weapons, only God's is more powerful. And angels are quicker, though, and can blink you out of subspace pockets faster. So when you would be put back in your pod, it would say Sentinel Seed Lock. And then you would go back to like base code fetal programming, where you felt like you were gridlocked into that space system. And people would just submit to it and then go into a type of sleep, like the land of Nod, and then it would be the biofeedback loop repeating you lies, like a serpent Oribus loop that was literally hooked in as a cybernetic system into your body, slowly corroding you. And the longer you stayed there, the worse it got, and the harder it was to get out of that. So I knew that the faster the kids could get out, the better chance they would stand having a real functional life. So you wouldn't want to be kept in outer darkness. You could find a way to leave your body, go somewhere else, go enter another body. That would always be available for you. The Sentinel voice would tell you you were sentenced to hell even. Sentinel sentenced to hell. And you'd either go to sleep there, accept it, dream with Satan, be stuck there, or reject it, fight it, break through, realize the whole reality that you were in was not God's reality for you, to keep you in a fetal state of disempowerment. 2 Samuel 20:22 is a great scripture, and Psalm 18:16 is too. Truly the Lord has resurrected his children in space, in deep earth, and in deep waters. Just like those scriptures say, you drew me out of deep water and pulled me out. And Yahushua is drawing the waters of salvation so that we can have living water pour out of us. Time Technologies Institute Albuquerque, New Mexico, time warp field technologies, time warp field generators. These were some of the terms that were used in the research to build this time ship, time machine offshoot program. DLA, TTRC, quantum foam, brain mesh, neural lace, exotic matter, frame dragging, time windows, depolarize, polarize the neuron energy chambers, decompression zones. One matter of mass equals infinite energy. You harvest the energy around the Earth's Schumann cavity. The Schumann resonance disconnects someone from it temporally, and you can offset them into a new time displacement in a different body. This creates a displacement pattern like a new heartbeat when you get off that, because our hearts are originally connected to Earth's heart in Schumann resonance. And it's the heartbeat of life. God says, seek my heart, seek my mind, seek my face, seek my understanding. There's a rhythm and a flow to divinity. And so if they get you off that for a second, they can come in with something like a heart attack gun, or they can try to time splice and do other things that would displace you, making it harder to get back into the natural rhythm and the flow when you're in full remembrance and know these things and these divine concepts. A new life capturing the potential energy toroidal currents, twisting energies and amalgamating with them. Gravity equals bent space-time, time wells thrown into via the omnichord whip of the Centurion. Anderson Institute became a World Time Council, Time Bureau type scenario with time runners trained to run and report, run and retrieve, changing world systems, world changers. Time warp field chambers were the final cut, like Mind Gamers 1998. We went into the time machine. Suspension zones made us targets for dark forces to come into the perimeter and slow down the force field so you couldn't move forward fast enough. TDD, temporal tremor detectors, much like time police were the sensors on the time ship in this program. The mind was researched and found out to be the equivalent of a temporal tremor detector in the playing fields. 4-part plan. The worst punishment was infinite recursion and the overwriting of consciousness. Out of this program also came time shells, ghosts in the shells, ghost protocols, chaos containment versus time controls. 203-7924-101, Area 54, Princeton ties, and Dr. Mallet in Connecticut. Creating webs of interdependencies, snuffing out, wiping out other families' bloodlines via the use of the time tech, also became and evolved into a covert genocidal time war game. Time bodies were then used and recycled out to offset this type of scenarios and events from continuing. Each super soldier cell SS has an origin seed pod Sentinel system with subunits anchored in time displacement stretched across a 5D chessboard with a Sentinel unit guarding each platform. Each super soldier cell was given an origin seed pod, much like a coffin, in service to guarding Satan's seeds via the use of looking glass, eye, across the vectors of space and time. Each soldier seed pod categorized as its own space-time vector, working in tandem with the others. Quantum lace, lattice, echelon tech controls, 1 through 10 levels, playing fields, out. Time wars, transcription errors, corrected satanic seed garden burns, castle clock, unlock. Sequestered recombinant DNA was returned, and all living life essence across the expanse. Centurions disengage AI overlord, archdemon, Christ Punisher, head Centurion. The time control technologies ended up becoming the time culture technologies.